The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. 1. June 1940 through October 1940. Vote for Lindbergh or vote for war. Fear presides over these memories, a perpetual fear. Of course, no childhood is without its terrors. Yet I wonder if I would have been a less frightened boy if Lindbergh hadn't been president, or if I hadn't been the offspring of Jews. When the first shock came in June of 1940, the nomination for the presidency of Charles A. Lindbergh, America's international aviation hero, by the Republican convention at Philadelphia, my father was 39, an insurance agent with a grade school education, earning a little under $50 a week, enough for the basic bills to be paid on time, but for little more. My mother, who'd wanted to go to teacher's college but couldn't because of the expense, who'd lived at home working as an office secretary after finishing high school, who'd kept us from feeling poor during the worst of the Depression by budgeting the earnings my father turned over to her each Friday as efficiently as she ran the household, was 36. My brother, Sandy, a seventh grader with a prodigy's talent for drawing, was 12, and I, a third grader, a term ahead of himself, an embryonic stamp collector, inspired like millions of kids by the country's foremost philatelist, Franklin Roosevelt, was 7. We lived in the second floor flat of a small 2.5 family house on a tree-lined street of frame wooden houses with red brick stoops, each stoop topped with a gable roof and fronted by a tiny yard boxed in with a low-cut hedge. The Wequahic neighborhood had been built on farm lots at an underdeveloped southwest edge of Newark just after World War I, some half-dozen of the streets named imperially for victorious naval commanders in the Spanish-American War, and the local movie house called after FDR's fifth cousin, and the country's 26th president, the Roosevelt. Our street, Summit Avenue, sat at the crest of a neighborhood hill, an elevation as high as any in the port city that rarely rises 100 feet above the level of the tidal salt marshes to the city's north and east, and the deep bay due east of the airport that bends around the oil tanks with the Bayonne Peninsula and merges with the New York Bay to flow past the Statue of Liberty and into the Atlantic. Looking west from our bedroom's rear window, we could sometimes see inland as far as the dark tree line of the Watchungs, a low-lying mountain range fringed by great estates and affluent, sparsely populated suburbs, the extreme edge of the known world. And about 8 miles from our house, a block to the south, was the working-class town of Hillside, whose population was predominantly Gentile. The boundary with Hillside marked the beginnings of Union County, another New Jersey entirely. We were a happy family in 1940. My parents were outgoing, hospitable people, their friends culled from among my father's associates at the office, and from the women who, along with my mother, had helped to organize the Parent-Teacher Association at newly built Chancellor Avenue School, where my brother and I were pupils. All were Jews. The neighborhood men either were in business for themselves, the owners of the local candy store, grocery store, jewelry store, dress shop, furniture shop, service station, and delicatessen, or the proprietors of tiny industrial shops over by the Newark-Irvington line, or self-employed plumbers, electricians, house painters, and boilermen, or were foot soldier salesmen like my father, out every day in the city streets and in people's houses peddling their wares on commission. The Jewish doctors and lawyers and the successful merchants who owned big stores downtown lived in one-family houses on streets branching off the eastern slope of the Chancellor Avenue Hill, closer to grassy, wooded Wequahic Park, a landscaped 300 acres whose boating lake, golf course, and harness racing track separated the Wequahic section from the industrial plants and shipping terminals lining Route 27 and the Pennsylvania Railroad viaduct east of that, and the burgeoning airport east of that, and the very edge of America east of that. The depots and docks of Newark Bay, where they unloaded cargo from around the world, at the western end of the neighborhood, the parklet's end, where we lived, there resided an occasional school teacher or pharmacist, but otherwise few professionals were among our immediate neighbors, and certainly none of the prosperous, entrepreneurial or manufacturing families. The men worked 50, 60, even 70 or more hours a week. The women worked all the time, with little assistance from labor-saving devices, washing laundry, ironing shirts, mending socks, turning collars, sewing on buttons, moth-proofing woolens, polishing furniture, sweeping and washing floors, washing windows, cleaning sinks, tubs, toilets, and stoves, vacuuming rugs, nursing the sick, shopping for food, cooking meals, feeding relatives, tidying closets and drawers, overseeing paint jobs and household repairs, arranging for religious observances, paying bills and keeping the family's books, while simultaneously attending to their children's health, clothing, cleanliness, schooling, nutrition, conduct, birthdays, discipline, and morale. A few women labored alongside their husbands in the family-owned stores on the nearby shopping streets, assisted after school and on Saturdays by their older children, who delivered orders and tended stock and did the cleaning up. It was work that identified and distinguished our neighbors for me, far more than religion. Nobody in the neighborhood had a beard or dressed in the antiquated old world style or wore a skull cap, either outdoors or in the houses I routinely floated through with my boyhood friends. The adults were no longer observant in the outward recognizable ways, if they were seriously observant at all, and aside from older shopkeepers like the tailor and the kosher butcher, and the ailing, decrepit grandparents living of necessity with their adult offspring, hardly anyone in the vicinity spoke with an accent. By 1940, Jewish parents and their children at the southwestern corner of New Jersey's largest city talked to one another in an American English that sounded more like the language spoken in Altoona or Binghamton than like the dialects famously spoken across the Hudson by our Jewish counterparts in the 5 boroughs. Hebrew lettering was stenciled on the butcher shop window and engraved on the lintels of the small neighborhood synagogues, but nowhere else, other than at the cemetery, did one's eye chance to land on the alphabet of the prayer book rather than on the familiar letters of the native tongue employed all the time by practically everyone, for every conceivable purpose, high or low. At the newsstand out front, at the corner candy store, 10 times more customers bought the racing forum than the Yiddish daily, the Forvitz. Israel did not yet exist. 6 million European Jews hadn't yet ceased to exist. The local relevance of distant Palestine under British mandate since the 1918 dissolution by the victorious Allies of the last far-flung provinces of the defunct Ottoman Empire was a mystery to me. When a stranger who did wear a beard and who never once was seen hatless appeared every few months after dark to ask in broken English for a contribution toward the establishment of a Jewish national homeland in Palestine, I, who wasn't an ignorant child, didn't quite know what he was doing on our landing. My parents would give me or Sandy a couple of coins to drop into his collection box. Lagris, I always thought, dispensed out of kindness so as not to hurt the feelings of a poor old man who from one year to the next seemed unable to get it through his head that we already had a homeland for 3 generations. Excuse me. I pledged allegiance to the flag of our homeland every morning at school. I sang of its marvels with my classmates at assembly programs. I eagerly observed its national holidays without giving a second thought to my affinity for the 4th of July fireworks, or the Thanksgiving turkey, or the Decoration Day doubleheader. Our homeland was America. Then the Republicans nominated Lindbergh, and everything changed. And there we will pause.